Hello, my name is Katie. I am super excited to talk to you about everything I have read this month because it's been a fantastic reading month. I hope you also had a great reading month. My goal, if you watched my June TBR, was to fall back in love with reading again. I've been in a bit of a reading slump and I just wanted to read whatever made me happy, and I definitely did that. I've read some things that have made me think a lot of things, and I've read some things that have put a great big old smile on my face. So let's chat. I read 14 books this month. 7 of them I read physically and 7 I read as audiobooks, and we're gonna chat about all of them. So one of the first things I read this month was The Martian by Andy Weir. I read Project Hail Mary earlier this year, absolutely loved it, and wanted to read Andy Weir's backlist. I think Project Hail Mary is still my favorite of the 2 things I've read by him, but I really enjoyed this book. Somehow Andy Weir is able to take stories about one dude alone on a different planet or in a spaceship and make them incredibly interesting. I was hooked from page 1, just like I was with Project Hail Mary. For some reason, I had a really hard time finishing the book at like this point in the book. I stopped reading for like 2 weeks. Then I picked it back up and it was still extremely interesting. And I was hooked again, and I don't know what that was about, but loved this, would recommend if you like Project Hail Mary. It's got the same cheeky humor in it. Very fun. Okay, now I want to talk about The Cat Who Saved Books. This is an adult book that was translated from Japanese, and honestly, it kind of reads like a middle grade. If you have kids, I would recommend reading this with them. It has a lot to say about books and the publishing industry. Our main character is a boy. His grandfather has just died, and his grandpa owns this bookstore. And he's in the bookstore trying to figure out what he's going to do with all the books there, if he's going to sell them, where he's going to go. He's got like this aunt that he hasn't really met before who's going to take him in. And this cat walks up to him and starts talking to him and tells him that there are books that need to be saved. And he's got these 3 labyrinths that he needs to solve in order to save the books. Like I said, it does read very middle grade, and I think sometimes it's a little heavy-handed with the message and the lessons it's trying to impart, but it does also really feel like a Studio Ghibli movie, so if you like that type of a vibe, I think you will enjoy this book. It's a nice thing to just like read on audiobook while you're on a walk early in the morning. I really enjoyed it. I think it's got something to say for all ages, but definitely not as substantive as I thought it was going to be. Okay, now we have my brother's favorite book. This is Ready Player One. Definitely makes sense why this is Mike's favorite book, because Mike makes video games for a living, and this is about a video game. The video game in here is The Oasis. It's this like artificial reality situation, and present day actual reality sucks. So everyone spends most of their time in The Oasis, which is this game. And our main character goes to school in the Oasis. The creator of the Oasis has died and left behind this Easter egg for everyone in the Oasis to play. And the first one to find the Easter egg gets his whole fortune and rights to control the Oasis, which is a pretty sick deal. It's like Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory on steroids. It was a really fun read if you've watched the movie. The book is nothing like the movie, so you can definitely watch and read them independently, and nothing will be spoiled for you pretty much because they're completely different. It was a bit of a shock watching the movie after reading the book, because there were things in here that I was super excited to see on the screen, and none of them happened in the movie. The creator of this video game, who's doing this Easter egg contest, is obsessed with the 80s, so there is a lot of 80s imagery in here, and I see people talking about how this book has too many 80s elements in it. But that's kind of the point. Like, the point is that this guy was obsessed with the 80s, and so he's just packing it into this contest so that everyone has to also learn all of the weird things that he loves about the 80s. So I thought that was great. The other thing in here that bothered me a lot was that the characters behave like they're teenagers, and they instant message and chat and think like they're kids who are gamers on the internet. And just the angst and that mentality annoyed me in the same way that it annoys me in real life. So they were very authentic characters, which is what the author was going for. So that doesn't bother me. even though it did annoy me, but they were authentic characters. I also read Almond. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I got. This is Allie's book club book for the Pocket Pages book club. It's a lot. Our main character, his amygdala does not function properly, and so he doesn't feel emotions like fear and love, and some pretty horrific things happen to him, and he does not feel anything about them. And we're basically following him, and he's trying to make sense of all these things that have happened, and we get his internal monologue, and it is an extremely interesting character study. There are some ways that the book ended that I'm not going to spoil for you, but that I have questions about, so I'm really excited to talk about this in the Discord for the book club this month. I read this on audiobook, and I would definitely recommend the audiobook. I think the actor did a great job of portraying our main character in a way that made sense and was true to how he was written. There's a lot of violence in here. A lot of things happen to this kid. There's a lot of conversation about whether or not it is better to have emotions when horrible things happen, or whether it is better to not have the emotions and not have to feel that pain. And I thought that was very interesting. I know I keep saying interesting, but I don't really have any other words to describe this. It made me think a lot of things, and I'm not really sure how I felt about it. So curious to hear what you guys thought. If you've read Almond, please let me know in the comments what your thoughts were. Okay, then we have The Girl with All the Gifts. This is one of my favorite horror that I have read maybe ever. It's incredible. I read This Entangled Life, which is a book about mushrooms, and there's a fungus in there called Alphedocordyceps, and it basically like hijacks ants and zombie pilots them in order to release its spores really high up. It's horrifying. And in this book, they've taken that fungus and they have made it mutate to infect humans, creating a zombie race of humans who tries to eat other humans. Exceptional. That was the only thing that I knew about this book before I read it, and I think that was a good place to go into this book. I don't recommend knowing much more than that before you read this, but because the way that the book starts and unfolds is extremely unsettling, and it is fantastic. Just have to say, I would skip the movie. They made some choices that I really hated and basically turned this incredibly thoughtful and nuanced and substantial book into a zombie slasher. Didn't like it. I love horror books that have something to say, and this book had so much to say, and I was so attached to all of the characters. They all were full and complete, and I just loved every second of this. I could not put this book down. I absolutely loved it. The audiobook is also fantastic. I would definitely recommend reading the audiobook early in the morning. It was like eerie and creepy, and I loved it. Okay, then I read 7 Days in June, which is one of my favorite romances I have ever read. I do have to say, I almost DNF'd this book because the relationship that we're following, so we are following 7 Days in June, present day, and 7 Days in June 15 years ago, when our main characters are teenagers when they first met, and their relationship when they're teenagers is extremely unhealthy. Like, they're bad for each other. They have this passion, this desire, and this need for each other that is incredibly codependent. They're both extremely mentally unwell, and I had a relationship similar to that when I was in high school, and so I nearly had to stop reading this book because I didn't want this book to say, this is a good relationship, and it really rubbed me the wrong way. But the way that this book actually handled that conversation was incredible, and I loved it, and it went from being something that I nearly hated to something that I absolutely love. Both of our main characters are writers, so we talk a lot about books, and it's kind of similar to Beach Read, which I'll talk about in a second, where one of them writes like literary fiction and the other one writes like, in this book it's smutty romance, vampire romance, and it's incredible. We're talking about motherhood, we talk about mental health, we talk about all of these really serious topics, and it's all wrapped up in this beautiful smutty bow, and I loved it. Okay, then we have Scythe. I just finished reading this a few days ago, and it was fantastic. I don't usually read young adult, but I actually read quite a bit of young adult this month. I could not put this book down. All I wanted to do was keep reading it. I was hooked from page 1. We are following this society. It is far in the future where everything has been solved. There are no isms. Even death has been solved. But the earth is overpopulated. So we have a group of people called Scythes who it's their job to kill people. Horrifying. This book also has a lot of things to say. I love that about Neil Shusterman is that he writes young adult in a way that is incredibly thought-provoking. And there's lots of drama, there's lots of teenage drama, but there is also lots of commentary on society and bigger topics. Not that being a teenager isn't a big topic, but I really, really loved this book. We are following 2 Scythe apprentices, and they're kind of learning what this is about. And we also there's diary entries in here from like the journals of other Scythes. I really love this juxtaposition of these 2 new characters who are learning what's going on, and then also hearing from their mentors who are older and more established, and hearing that history from their point of view. That juxtaposition was really good. And I don't know if I'll be continuing in the trilogy, so please let me know if you've read the whole trilogy, what you thought of the second and third books. I thought this worked really well as a standalone. It did leave some things open, and I'm intrigued to find out what happens next. But I think this unique combination of there being like this competition element and this juxtaposition of old versus young and this finding out what this world is about was really interesting to me, and I just don't think the second and third books are going to be interesting in the same way, so interested to hear your thoughts. Okay, then I read The Day the World Stops Shopping, and I really don't know how I feel about this book yet, and I actually read this in May, but I forgot to log it in Storygraph, so I'm talking about it a month late already. This book is about consumerism and what would happen. It's a thought experiment. What would happen if the entire world stopped shopping, and stopping shopping is like reducing our consumption by a certain percentage. And I was under the impression that if the entire world reduced their consumption, everything would be fine and good and great. But what would actually happen is we'd be plunged into a recession. And this book is kind of telling you that hard truth and also saying this needs to happen. So we need to figure out a way to make these 2 things work. I thought that the book could have gone further and provide alternate structures that we could have instead of capitalism that would work better. But I get it. We're kind of entrenched in capitalism now. It's kind of a hard thing to just do away with. But this book left me feeling some type of way about consumption, and I would recommend you read it. It was a tough read, had some interesting things to say, would recommend. This is Sick Kids in Love. This is a YA romance. Our main characters both have chronic illnesses. Absolutely loved it. Our main character has rheumatoid arthritis, and the love interest has Gaucher's, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, disease. I thought this was a really great exploration of chronic illness, and it was really accessible both so that people who have chronic illness are going to feel very seen, and also that healthy people are going to be able to figure out how to be an ally to their friends while reading this as well. I thought it was really great. Definitely would recommend if you want something that'll put a smile on your face but still make you think some things. I think this was great. I'm someone who deals with chronic pain, so I definitely felt seen by this book and really, really enjoyed it. Okay, next we have Milk Fed. This book is incredibly unhinged. If you have a history with eating disorders, do your research, take care, maybe skip this one. Our main character has an eating disorder. She's completely obsessed with food and calories, and we get to see like her rituals with food and the way that she thinks about food, and it's incredibly unhealthy. And then we have that juxtaposed with someone who has an incredibly healthy relationship to food, while alternatively our main character has a very healthy relationship to her sexuality and our other character does not. This book had a lot more to say than I thought it would. We're talking about sexuality, we're talking about eating and diet culture, especially in the film industry in Hollywood, and we're also talking about Judaism in a really interesting and nuanced way. Yeah, this book had a lot more to say than I thought it would. I hear people talk about how unhinged this book is, but not about like what it's trying to say, and it's definitely trying to say a lot of things, and I think it does a really good job. Okay, then we have The Black Flamingo. This is one of my favorite books I've read this year. This is a story of a boy who is half Jamaican and half Greek. He's growing up and he goes to school in London for college, and he's gay and he finds his way to drag while he's in college, and it's just a really incredible story. I got a lot out of it, and I'm really glad that this book exists for young people. This book is written entirely in verse, which I loved. I loved that about Split Tooth, and I loved that about this book too. And then there are also standalone poems that are interspersed throughout the book as well, and they're all incredible, amazing writing. Definitely want to read more from this author. Highly, highly recommend. Made me smile, made me cry. It was great. Okay, this is one of my favorite nonfictions I read this year, and it is Braiding Sweetgrass. I read This Entangled Life and really liked how we were talking about plants and mushrooms, and then I wanted more of that, so I picked up Braiding Sweetgrass as an audiobook. Really loved the audiobook. I ran out of storage, so I just have 3 things left to tell you about. Okay, so don't know how much of me talking about Braiding Sweetgrass got through, but it's one of my favorite books that I have read so far this year. I love the way that our author was able to combine indigenous wisdom with her botany career and all of the knowledge that she's gained through that way of studying plants. I'm a huge fan of regenerative agriculture and absolutely love this book. Okay, then I read The Memory Librarian, which again, I loved. This is Janelle Monáe's book that isn't set in the same world as their album and motion picture Dirty Computer. You definitely don't have to have watched or listened to any of their previous work to enjoy this book. We're set in a future where New Dawn is the regime, and this is a series of short stories that are following different characters at different places in this new regime. I have lots of thoughts about this. If you want to hear more, I'm going to link my reading vlog that I did for both this and Black Flamingo, but I really did enjoy the stories in here. I'm considering doing a whole video on this universe that now includes an album, a movie, and now this book, so let me know if you'd be interested in that. And the last book I read is Beach Read. Beach Read follows our 2 main characters who are writers, and one of them, the guy, he writes literary fiction, like dark, sad endings, and our female main character writes women's fiction, like romance, happy endings, and there's a lot of commentary on the fact that women's fiction is a bullshit genre and should just be fiction. I really loved what this book had to say. It did have some substantive elements in addition to the romance, and it was a very, very fun time. Our main characters basically make this bet where they are trying to see who can write the other's genre. So she's trying to write a sad ending literary fiction, and he's trying to write a happy ending romance story, and it was just beautiful and I loved it, and I would recommend the audiobook for that one. Okay, so that is everything that I read in June. I hope your reading month was just as lovely as mine was. Please let me know what you read this month in the comments. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts on them as well. Thank you so much for being here. I post every other Tuesday and every Friday. So if you'd like to stick around for more book content, please consider subscribing. If you like this video, I think you'll like this one. Until next time, happy reading. I'll see you soon. Bye.